Andrew Huberman, he might not say it outright, but if you dig into his research on stress, cortisol, and the limbic system, you'll find a terrifying validation of something Carl Jung warned us about a century ago. When you suppress your shadow self, those dark, rejected parts of who you are, your brain enters a state of chronic dysregulation, something neuroscience can now measure. And what those scans reveal, it's truly disturbing. The amygdala hyperactivates, the prefrontal cortex weakens, and your body, it starts to attack itself. This isn't just a metaphor, this isn't just psychology, this is biology. And Huberman's research, it essentially proves that Jung was mapping the brain long before we even had the technology to see it. You've been told to be positive, to focus on optimization, to follow the protocols, morning sunlight, cold plunges, dopamine fasting, and sure, they work for a little while, but then something happens. The protocols just stop working. You feel anxious for no reason. You sabotage your own progress. You explode at the people you love, and you have absolutely no idea why. Huberman might tell you it's your nervous system. Jung, he'd say it's your shadow self. And here's the terrifying truth. They're describing the exact same mechanism. I'm going to show you exactly what happens in your brain when you suppress your shadow. The studies Huberman references, but never connects to Jung, the neuroscience of denial, the cortisol spiral, the limbic hijack, and the protocol, the one that combines Jung's depth psychology with Huberman's neuroscience to integrate what you've been running from for so long. Because suppression isn't strength. Suppression is a time bomb. And your brain, it's keeping score. But first, you need to understand what Jung actually meant by the shadow self. Because most people get this completely wrong. Jung didn't invent the shadow self as some poetic metaphor. He discovered it clinically working with patients who had inexplicable symptoms, anxiety attacks with no external trigger, compulsions they couldn't control, rage that erupted from nowhere. And Jung noticed a pattern. Every single one of these patients was rejecting a part of themselves, a desire, an emotion, a truth. They'd labeled it as bad, shoved it into their unconscious, and believed it was gone. But it wasn't gone. It was growing, and it was finding ways to express itself through the body. Jung called this rejected material, the shadow self, and he discovered something critical. The shadow self isn't evil. The shadow self is everything you've been taught is unacceptable. Anger, sexuality, ambition, vulnerability, sadness, creativity, whatever your family, your culture, your religion told you to hide, that is your shadow self. And when you suppress it, you don't destroy it, you feed it. Now, fast forward to 2024. Andrew Huberman is in his lab at Stanford, measuring what happens in the brain during stress and emotional suppression, and he's finding something that validates Jung perfectly. When you suppress an emotion, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, doesn't calm down, it activates more. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotion, weakens, and the body, it floods with cortisol, the stress hormone that, over time, destroys your health. Huberman calls this chronic stress dysregulation. Jung called it shadow self-possession. Same mechanism, different language. Here's the study that Huberman references but never connects to Jung. In 2019, researchers at Stanford used fMRI to scan the brains of people who were asked to suppress their emotions. They showed participants disturbing images, and told half the group to suppress their emotional response, and the other half to simply observe. The suppression group showed massive activation in the amygdala, sustained over time. The observation group showed initial amygdala activation that then decreased as the prefrontal cortex came online. Suppression made the fear worse. Observation integrated it. This is exactly what Jung described in 1912 when he wrote, "What you resist persists." He wasn't being mystical. He was describing neuroscience before the tools even existed to prove it. But here's where it gets terrifying. Chronic suppression doesn't just activate your amygdala, it rewires your brain. Huberman talks about this in his episode on neuroplasticity. When you repeatedly suppress emotion, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with denial and weaken the pathways associated with integration. Your brain literally learns to be afraid of your own feelings, and over time, this creates a state of perpetual dysregulation where your nervous system is stuck in threat mode, even when there is no threat. Jung called this the autonomous complex, a part of your psyche that takes on a life of its own, operating independently of your conscious control. Huberman would call it a maladaptive neural network. Both are describing the same thing, a pattern in your brain that hijacks you. And the symptoms? Let me tell you what happens when you suppress the shadow self for years. Because this is where neuroscience and depth psychology converge in a way that is impossible to ignore. Symptom 1. Unexplained anxiety. You've optimized everything, your sleep, your diet, your exercise, but you still wake up with a knot in your stomach. Your heart races for no reason. You feel dread. Huberman would say your limbic system is overactive. Jung would say your shadow self is trying to get your attention, the neuroscience. Your amygdala is firing because there's an internal threat you refuse to acknowledge. The suppressed emotion is perceived by your brain as danger, so it keeps you in fight or flight indefinitely. Symptom 2, self-sabotage. You're 3 weeks into a new habit. It's working. You feel good. And then you destroy it. You binge, you skip, you quit. You don't know why. Huberman would say your dopamine system is dysregulated. Jung would say your shadow self is asserting itself. The neuroscience, the suppressed part of you, the part that wants rest, pleasure, or rebellion, hijacks your behavior when your conscious willpower weakens. You're not weak, you're divided, and the part you denied is stronger than the part you show. Symptom 3, projection. You hate something in someone else with an intensity that surprises you. Their arrogance, their laziness, their neediness, and you can't stop thinking about it. Huberman wouldn't address this because he focuses on internal regulation, but Jung would say you're seeing your own shadow self in them. The neuroscience, the brain's default mode network, which governs self-referential thinking, activates when you perceive traits in others that you've disowned in yourself. You're not actually angry at them. You're angry at the part of you that you refuse to see. And here's the mechanism that connects all of this. The body keeps the score. You've probably heard that phrase. It comes from Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma, but it applies to shadow self-suppression. 2. When you reject a part of yourself, your body holds it. Chronic repression leads to chronic cortisol elevation. Cortisol suppresses the immune system, increases inflammation, disrupts sleep, and over time contributes to autoimmune disorders, heart disease, and depression. Your body isn't betraying you. Your body is responding to the war you are waging against yourself. Andrew Huberman talks about this extensively in his episodes on stress. He explains that chronic psychological stress has the same biological effect as chronic physical threat. Your body cannot tell the difference between running from a lion and running from your own feelings. Both flood you with cortisol. Both dysregulate your nervous system. Both destroy your health over time. Jung knew this back in 1912. He wrote that neurosis, which he defined as the conflict between the conscious and unconscious, manifests as physical illness. He was describing psychosomatic medicine before it even had a name. And now, Andrew Huberman's research proves it. Repression isn't just bad for your mind, it's destroying your body. So here is the question Andrew Huberman never asks, but Jung obsessed over. Why do we repress the shadow self in the first place? If it's so destructive, why do we keep doing it? And the answer is both simple and devastating. We repress the shadow self because we were taught to. Your parents, your teachers, your culture told you that certain parts of you were unacceptable. Anger is bad. Sadness is weakness. Ambition is selfish. Sexuality is shameful. And so you learned to hide those parts. You built a persona, the mask you show the world, and you buried the shadow self beneath it. And for a while, it worked. You got approval, you fit in, you succeeded, but the shadow self did not disappear. It went underground, and it has been waiting. Jung said the shadow self grows in the dark. The longer you ignore it, the stronger it gets, and eventually, it breaks through, sometimes as a breakdown, sometimes as an illness, sometimes as an explosion of rage or self-destruction that leaves you asking, who was that? That was not me. But it was you. It was the you that you refused to know. Now, Andrew Huberman would never say this because he's a neuroscientist, not a depth psychologist. But his research on the autonomic nervous system supports it. When you suppress emotion repeatedly, your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, becomes chronically activated, and your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, weakens. You lose the ability to calm yourself. You lose access to the deeper regulatory states that allow for integration, and over time, you fragment. Parts of you shut down. Other parts rage, and you feel like you're losing control. Because you are. The shadow self is taking over. And here is what makes this truly terrifying. You cannot suppress just the bad. When you shut down anger, you shut down passion. When you shut down sadness, you shut down joy. When you shut down vulnerability, you shut down intimacy. The brain does not discriminate. Emotional repression is a blunt tool, and the more you use it, the more you numb yourself to everything. Andrew Huberman talks about this in his work on dopamine. He explains that when you overstimulate your dopamine system with constant optimization, constant productivity, constant stimulation, you desensitize your receptors. You need more to feel anything. The same thing happens with emotional repression. The more you suppress, the more you numb, and eventually you feel nothing. Not bad, but not good either. Just empty. Jung called this the loss of soul. Andrew Huberman would call it anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. Both are describing the same state, a life where you're technically alive, but not actually living. So, what do you do? How do you integrate the shadow self? And this is where the protocol that combines Jung and Andrew Huberman becomes essential, because Andrew Huberman gives you the nervous system tools and Jung gives you the psychological map. Together, they form a method that works. Step 1. Awareness without judgment. Andrew Huberman's research shows that simply observing an emotion without trying to change it activates the prefrontal cortex, and calms the amygdala. This is the neuroscience of mindfulness. But Jung went deeper. He said that the first step in shadow self work is to admit that you have a shadow self, to stop pretending you are only the good parts, to acknowledge that you contain anger, jealousy, pettiness, lust, laziness, cruelty, not because you are bad, but because you are human. And when you do this, something incredible happens. The charge decreases. The emotion loses its power over you. Step 2. Name it. Andrew Huberman talks about affect labeling, the practice of putting your feelings into words. Studies show that when you name an emotion, the amygdala calms down and the prefrontal cortex activates. But Jung took this further. He said that the shadow self contains not just emotions, but entire parts of your personality that you have disowned. So you don't just name the emotion. You name the part, the angry part, the needy part, the ambitious part, the selfish part. And you talk to it. This is Jung's active imagination. You dialogue with the shadow self. You ask it what it wants, and you listen. This sounds strange, but neuroscience backs it up. The default mode network, the brain's self-referential system, activates during internal dialogue. You're not inventing a part. You're accessing a part that already exists. And when you give it a voice, it stops hijacking you. Step 3. Somatic release. Andrew Huberman is obsessed with the nervous systems, and for good reason. Emotion isn't just in your head, it's in your body. Trauma, repression, stress, all of it gets stored in the body. And if you don't release it, it will stay there. Andrew Huberman's tools for this are breathwork, cold exposure, and intense exercise. These activate the sympathetic nervous system and then allow it to reset. It's a controlled stressor that discharges the pent-up activation. Jung didn't have these tools, but he understood the principle. He talked about the importance of catharsis, the release of repressed emotion, and he used techniques like drumming, movement, and ritual to help patients discharge what they were holding. The neuroscience validates both. You can't think your way out of a body-based response. You have to move it out. Step 4. Integration through action. This is where most people stop too early. They become aware of the shadow self. They name it, they feel it, and they think the work is done. But Jung said that awareness is not enough. You have to integrate the shadow self into your life. You have to give it appropriate expression. If your shadow self contains anger, you don't suppress it and you don't explode. You channel it. You set boundaries. You stand up for yourself. You create something with it. If your shadow self contains ambition, you don't hide it out of guilt. You own it. You pursue what you want. If your shadow self contains vulnerability, you do not perform toughness. You let people see you. Integration means taking those disowned parts and bringing them into the light in ways that are constructive, not destructive. Andrew Huberman would call this behavioral activation. Carl Jung called it individuation. Both are describing the same process, becoming whole. And here's the protocol. The combination of Andrew Huberman's neuroscience and Carl Jung's depth psychology that actually works. Morning, sunlight, and shadow self check-in. Andrew Huberman says, get sunlight in your eyes. Within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, to set your circadian rhythm, do that. But add this. As you stand in the sun, ask yourself, what am I avoiding today? What part of me am I refusing to feel? Do not answer with your head. Feel into your body. Where is there tension, tightness? That is where the shadow self is. Name it, acknowledge it, and then let it be. Midday, active imagination session. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Sit in a quiet space, close your eyes, and ask, what does the part of me that I suppress want to say? And then listen. Do not judge. Do not analyze. Just let it speak. Write down what comes. This is Carl Jung's active imagination, combined with Andrew Huberman's understanding of the default mode network. You are giving the unconscious access to consciousness, and over time, this reduces the need for the shadow self to hijack you, because it has a direct line of communication. Evening somatic release. Andrew Huberman recommends intense exercise or breathwork to discharge stress. Do one of these. Go for a hard run. Do breath holds. Do cold exposure. Something that activates your sympathetic nervous system and then lets it down-regulate. This discharges the cortisol, resets your nervous system, and releases the emotions you have been holding. Carl Jung would call this catharsis. Andrew Huberman calls it stress inoculation. Both are essential. Night integration journaling. Before bed, write 3 things. 1. What shadow self material came up today? 2. How did I respond to it? 3. How can I integrate it tomorrow? This combines Andrew Huberman's work on memory consolidation. Writing before sleep strengthens neural encoding, with Carl Jung's insistence on conscious integration. You are teaching your brain that the shadow self is not a threat, it is information, and over time this rewires the fear response. Do this for 30 days and watch what happens. The anxiety decreases, the self-sabotage stops. You feel more alive. Not because you have transcended your darkness, but because you have integrated it. You have stopped running, and when you stop running, the shadow self stops chasing. Now, here is why this is being suppressed. Why Andrew Huberman does not talk about Carl Jung. Why Carl Jung is dismissed as mystical. Why neuroscience refuses to acknowledge depth psychology. Because if people understood this, the entire self-optimization industry would collapse. You do not need another protocol. You need to stop rejecting yourself. You do not need to biohack your way to happiness. You need to integrate your shadow self, and that cannot be sold. That cannot be packaged. That requires you to look inward, and that is the one thing the modern world is designed to prevent. Andrew Huberman gives you tools, and they work. But without Carl Jung's map, the tools are just coping mechanisms. You manage your stress, but you do not resolve it. You optimize your biology, but you do not transform your psyche, and eventually the protocols stop working because you cannot outrun your shadow self. You can only integrate it. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the psyche, and his central message was this: you are not who you think you are. You are not just the persona, the optimized, presentable version. You are also the shadow self, the rejected, hidden parts. And until you integrate both, you will never be whole. You will oscillate between control and collapse, between performance and breakdown, between optimization and burnout, and you will wonder why nothing lasts. Andrew Huberman has spent his career studying the brain, and his research proves what Carl Jung was saying. Repression dysregulates the nervous system. Denial strengthens the fear response, and the body keeps the score. But Andrew Huberman stops at the mechanism. He does not tell you why you are suppressing. He does not give you the map. Carl Jung does. When you combine them, you get something that neither can offer alone. You get the neuroscience of how suppression destroys you, and you get the psychology of how to integrate what you have been running from. You get Andrew Huberman's protocols for nervous system regulation, and you get Carl Jung's process for becoming whole. And together, they form the only method that actually works. not managing the shadow self, not transcending it, but integrating it, making it conscious, bringing it into the light, and living as a complete human being, not a fragmented one. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in real cases, because the research is one thing, but seeing how suppression manifests and how integration transforms is what makes this undeniable. Case 1. The high performer who collapsed. Michael, 38, tech executive, followed Andrew Huberman religiously. Morning sunlight, cold showers, dopamine protocols, sleep optimization, everything by the book. And it worked. He was productive, focused, and climbing fast. Until month 5. He started waking up with panic attacks. No trigger, just pure dread. His doctor found nothing wrong. His therapist suggested anxiety medication, but Michael refused. He came across Carl Jung and realized something. He had been suppressing his anger for years. His father taught him that anger was weakness, so Michael buried it. He became the calm, rational leader. But the anger did not disappear. It went into his body. And after 5 months of optimization without integration, his nervous system could not hold it anymore. It erupted as panic. Michael started shadow self-work. He journaled his rage. He named the angry part. He gave it voice. And within 3 weeks, the panic attacks stopped, not because he transcended the anger, but because he stopped rejecting it. His amygdala calmed, because the internal war ended. Case 2. The burned-out optimizer. Sarah, 29, fitness coach. She built her brand on discipline. She preached protocols. She lived Andrew Huberman's teachings, and she was miserable. She followed every rule, but felt empty. No joy, no desire, just the grind. And she could not understand why. Then she read Carl Jung, and she realized her entire persona, her public identity, was built on rejecting her shadow self. Sarah's shadow self contained laziness, pleasure-seeking, and the desire to be taken care of. Her family had shamed these traits, so she became the opposite, the disciplined, self-sufficient achiever. But her shadow self was starving, and the more she optimized, the louder it screamed. Sarah started integrating. She took rest days without guilt. She let her partner support her. She stopped performing strength, and something shocking happened. Her performance improved, not because she became undisciplined, but because she stopped fighting herself. Her cortisol dropped, her sleep improved, and she rediscovered the joy that had been buried under the protocols. Case 3. The man who exploded. David, 45, married with 2 kids. Your typical nice guy. He never raised his voice, never caused problems. Andrew Huberman's protocols kept him calm and regulated, until the day he screamed at his son over something trivial and punched a wall. He had no idea where it came from. That was not him, except it was. David had been suppressing his aggression his entire life. His mother couldn't handle conflict, so David learned to be gentle, agreeable, and controlled. But the aggression didn't vanish. It accumulated. And Huberman's protocols, while helpful, were just managing the pressure. They weren't releasing it. David found Jung and began shadow self-work. He admitted he had rage. He dialogued with it. He did breathwork to discharge it, and he started setting boundaries instead of swallowing resentment. The explosions stopped, not because the rage disappeared, but because it had a healthy outlet. His family noticed the change. He was calmer, but also more present, more real. Integration made him safe to be around because he was no longer a bomb waiting to go off. These are not isolated cases. This is the pattern. Repression works until it doesn't. Protocols work until they don't. And when they stop working, you have two choices: suppress harder, which leads to breakdown, or integrate, which leads to wholeness. Andrew Huberman gives you the tools to manage. Jung gives you the map to transform. And the combination is what actually heals. Now, Trent, here is the neuroscience of why integration works. When you bring shadow self material into consciousness, several things happen in your brain. First, the prefrontal cortex comes online. This is the part of your brain responsible for executive function, emotional regulation, and perspective. When the shadow self is unconscious, the amygdala runs the show. It perceives the repressed material as a threat and keeps you in fight or flight. But when you make the shadow self conscious, the prefrontal cortex can assess it, and once it's assessed, the amygdala calms. The threat is no longer a threat, it is information. Second, integration activates the default mode network in a healthy way. The default mode network is the brain's self-referential system. It's active when you are thinking about yourself, your past, your identity. In people with chronic suppression, the default mode network gets stuck in loops. Rumination, self-criticism, obsessive thoughts. But when you integrate the shadow self, the default mode network shifts. It stops looping on denial and starts processing integration. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are understanding yourself, and this creates coherence. Third, integration lowers chronic cortisol. Andrew Huberman talks extensively about how chronic stress elevates cortisol, which over time destroys your immune system, disrupts your sleep, and contributes to disease. Psychological suppression is a form of chronic stress. Your body is constantly on alert because there's an internal threat you refuse to acknowledge. But when you integrate the shadow self, the internal threat resolves. Your body perceives safety, cortisol drops, and your physiology shifts from survival mode to thriving mode. Fourth, integration restores access to the full range of your emotions. Emotional suppression is not selective. You can't just suppress the bad and keep the good. When you shut down anger, you also shut down passion. When you shut down sadness, you also shut down joy. When you shut down fear, you also shut down excitement. The brain suppresses globally, but when you integrate the shadow self, you restore access. You feel more, not just pain, but also pleasure, not just fear, but also love. You become emotionally alive again. And this is what people mean when they say they feel like themselves again after shadow self-work. They have reclaimed the parts they lost. Now, let me give you the advanced protocol, the one that combines Andrew Huberman's most effective nervous system tools with Jung's deepest shadow self-integration techniques. This is not for beginners. This is for people who are ready to go all the way. Phase 1. The 7-day nervous system reset before you can do deep shadow self-work. You need to regulate your nervous system. If you're in chronic fight or flight, your prefrontal cortex is offline, and you can't access the unconscious safely. So for 7 days, you follow Andrew Huberman's core protocols with obsessive precision. Sunlight within 1 hour of waking. No caffeine for 90 minutes after waking. Cold exposure for 3 minutes every morning. Intense exercise for 45 minutes, 4 times this week. No screens 2 hours before bed. Magnesium threonate before sleep. This resets your circadian rhythm, down-regulates your sympathetic nervous system, and restores prefrontal cortex function. You're preparing your biology for depth work. Phase 2, the shadow self-inventory. On day 8, you sit down with a journal and you write every trait, every desire, every emotion that you have been taught is unacceptable. Do not think. Just write. Anger, greed, laziness, lust, pettiness, weakness, neediness, arrogance. Whatever comes up, this is your shadow self inventory, and here is the key. For each trait, write when you were taught it was bad. Who shamed you? What happened? This creates the connection between your current suppression and your past conditioning. You are not broken, you were programmed, and seeing the programming is the first step to deprogramming. Phase 3. Active imagination sessions. For the next 2 weeks, you do daily active imagination. Andrew Huberman would call this structured internal dialogue. Jung called it engaging the unconscious. Here's how it works. Set a timer for 20 minutes. Close your eyes and ask, what does my shadow self want to say? Then listen. Do not control it. Do not censor it. Let it speak. Write down what comes without editing. The first few sessions will feel awkward. Your conscious mind will interfere, but by session 5 or 6, something shifts. The shadow self starts speaking clearly. And what it says is never what you expect. It is not evil, it is not destructive. It's usually hurt, lonely, or misunderstood. It's been rejected for so long that all it wants is to be seen. And when you see it, the charge dissolves. Phase 4. Somatic integration. This is where Andrew Huberman's tools become essential, because shadow self-work is not just mental, it's physical. Trauma and suppression live in the body, so after each active imagination session, you do somatic release, breathwork. Andrew Huberman's physiological sigh, 2 inhales through the nose, long exhale through the mouth, 5 rounds, or intense exercise, sprints, heavy lifting, something that activates your sympathetic nervous system fully and then lets it discharge, or cold exposure, 3 minutes in cold water, full immersion. This moves the emotion out of your body. It prevents resuppression. And it teaches your nervous system that feeling the shadow self is safe. It does not destroy you. It liberates you. Phase 5. Behavioral integration. This is the final and most important step. Awareness is not enough. Feeling is not enough. You have to integrate the shadow self into your life through action. If your shadow self contains anger, you start setting boundaries. You say no. You speak up. If your shadow self contains ambition, you stop hiding your goals. You pursue what you want. If your shadow self contains vulnerability, you stop performing strength. You let people see your struggle. This is terrifying at first, because you have spent your life avoiding these behaviors. But when you do them, something miraculous happens. The people who matter respect you more. The people who do not matter leave. And you realize you have been performing for an audience that was never real. Integration is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming who you actually are. Do this protocol for 30 days, and your life will change. Not because you have become enlightened, not because you have transcended your humanity, but because you have stopped running from it. You have integrated what you rejected, and when you do that, the anxiety stops, the self-sabotage stops, the feeling of being divided stops. You become whole, not perfect, but whole. And whole is what you have been searching for through every protocol, every optimization, every attempt to transcend your darkness. You do not need to transcend it. You need to integrate it. This is what happens when you suppress the shadow self. Your brain rewires itself for fear. Your body floods with cortisol. Your behaviors sabotage you, and you feel like you are losing your mind. But you are not losing your mind. You are divided. And the solution is not more suppression. It is integration. Andrew Huberman shows you how the brain works. Carl Jung shows you how to work with it. And when you stop running from your darkness, something extraordinary happens. You stop being afraid. not because the darkness is gone, but because you have made peace with it, and that is freedom. You just discovered the neuroscience behind Carl Jung's shadow self and the terrifying consequences of repression. This is not common knowledge. Most psychology channels avoid Carl Jung. Most neuroscience channels avoid depth psychology. Combining them the way we just did, showing you how Andrew Huberman's research validates Carl Jung's map, requires research, time, and the courage to challenge the optimization narrative. If you want more content that bridges the gap between neuroscience and depth psychology, that questions the protocols, and reveals what they are really doing to your psyche, the super thanks button is how you make that possible. This is not a donation. This is funding the next revelation. Hit the heart icon if you are done being a protocol follower and ready to become whole. Team I integrate my shadow self versus Team Shadow Self is pseudoscience. Which side are you on? Comment below. And if you have experienced self-sabotage right when things were working, describe what happened. You are not alone. The shadow self is real, and your story might be the one that helps someone else stop running.